Hey guys, welcome back to Marvelous Wonder. Today I have my friend Jack on. Jack, thanks for joining.
No, I'm glad to be here. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, Jack, why don't you start off just telling us a little bit about yourself? Give us a little background.
Oh, well, I grew up in Kentucky. I grew up in Hebron, Kentucky, and more of like a rural area. Um, I didn't really have like a lot of religious influence in my home as a kid or anything. And I don't know what to say.
Yeah, that's good. Maybe um so you grew up in Kentucky and what's your what has been I want to give you a chance to kind of share your full journey of faith
Yeah,
including your conversion.
yeah,
And so maybe tell us a little bit about beliefs wise, where you've been in your life, and a little
oh
bit
yeah.
about your journey with that.
Oh, for sure. Well, I always vaguely believed kind of in Christianity. Like, I knew the idea of God and Jesus and stuff like that. But because I didn't really have any kind of concrete foundation in my home, I didn't really know what to believe. So the moment I turned 18, and you turn 18, you're trying to figure yourself out and, express yourself and learn more about yourself. I wanted to explore that deeper, and I tried pretty much every kind of church, really. Like, I've tried everything from Baptist churches to, you know, Catholicism. My parents actually are Buddhist. So I had a little bit, well, they found Buddhism when I got a little bit older, probably 15, 16. So I had some of that kind of influence. So I was really all over the place when it came to like spirituality and trying to decipher, like, what is true? What should I believe? Where should I be? That kind of thing.
So, as you were going around to these different churches, you mentioned the Baptist church and Catholicism and some exposure to Buddhism. Um, what did you feel like you were either learning or maybe not getting from these?
Well, I mean, I felt like I wasn't really learning much at all, to be honest. Like, I mean, it felt like when I was going to a lot of these churches that, you were kind of being like spoon fed, which is fine. Different content every week or different lessons, but I didn't really feel like I was understanding myself better, or at least understanding God better as a concept. I also had a lot of questions about things that I felt like I don't want to call them plot holes because it's the Bible, but like kind of like things that were missing in Christianity. I had a lot of questions about like the dichotomy between like an all loving father and concepts of black and white, heaven and hell, and things like that. I had a lot of questions about like what's the point of making people and stuff like that. There were a lot of pieces for me in Christianity that I felt like it kind of didn't really make sense, like why we were all here, what we were doing, and exactly what God's intentions were for us. Those were kind of the biggest pieces that I was missing, and I felt like that was really why I was waxing and waning from being Christians, because I didn't super understand like what actually is my relationship with God, what is my purpose with God, like what does God want with me. There was a lot of things like that I didn't super understand when I was kind of practicing these different denominations.
So, how did you go about looking for the answers? Were you meeting with people and asking them questions, or were you just attending services? Or
Um, I was attending services, and when I had been around for a while, for example, I was at a non-denominational church for a while, and you get to know the pastors a little bit better and that kind of thing. So I did have people to ask questions, but a lot of people really didn't have very satisfying answers. Um, I'm a pretty skeptical person myself, so for a lot of times for me, God works in mysterious ways wasn't very satisfying to me for a lot of these answers. And there wasn't really anybody with like the authority or to answer things for me. There weren't really people that had like access to a plethora of information or anything like that. It was pretty much, to me, it felt a lot like, not to be offensive, but like kind of like the blind leading the blind a little bit. Like it felt like there weren't really any answers for me there, essentially.
Okay. So, how long would you say you were kind of in this searching period?
Oh, years. I mean, I started when I was probably 16 because, I had a girlfriend take me to like a youth service kind of thing, and that kind of re-sparked my interest. And I didn't really stop until I was, I don't know, like 22 before I actually found, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But that whole time I was, to different degrees, pretty hungry to find something bigger, or to find something where I finally felt like the pieces all fell together.
Okay. So, tell us what that was like when you came across, or how did you come in contact with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints? And what was your experience like as you started to learn more and get more involved?
Yeah, well, I was at a pretty low point of my life when I found the church. I had just moved back. The moment I turned 18, I pretty much just drifted, and I'd just gone back from living in Tennessee for a while. And at the time, I was at such a low point in my life. I was 22 or so, I was probably 21, I guess. And, I was drinking a lot. I started smoking. And I didn't really have any direction for my life. I felt like at the time, life kind of felt like a scary roller coaster you couldn't really get off. It just seemed like things kind of happened and you were dealt certain cards. But again, even though I was in such a low point, I was still kind of looking for something more. I had friends in the LDS church, or at least a couple, that had kind of mentioned it to me before, but I felt like I had heard so much like information about this or this or this that I really didn't think I was interested. But one day I actually got a message just like on Facebook one night on like a Friday or something. And a missionary had reached out and invited me to church. And I pretty much, my wheels were spinning and I wasn't getting anywhere, with kind of my spiritual journey, that I was at the point where an invitation was enough for me to go, yeah, I'll give it a shot. Um, and we had our first lessons over the phone. And the first one being about the restoration. I was interested in it. It wasn't, I wouldn't say I was quite like sold on it at this point, but I was like, yeah, I understand like these beliefs, and I think that these kind of make sense. I'm willing to at least hear the next chapter of the book, essentially. And I started reading my Book of Mormon, started reading the Bible again, that kind of thing. And the missionaries are always very good about, okay, we've told you this, but you should go pray and think about this. Which appealed to me a lot because, being a skeptical person, it was really cool to finally have an experience where not only was I being taught, but I was also being told to kind of think for myself. I felt like, for the first time. So it's just such a great exploratory process, of learning more about faith and learning more about God, but also internalizing that and praying, and finally having that sort of, I don't even want to call it like the scientific process, but a little bit, I guess, where you're starting to really think about and expound on these ideas as you're learning them. And it was really refreshing. So I get to the second lesson. I can't remember that one, but I'm pretty sure the third one was the plan of salvation or plan of happiness. And for me, that was finally the huge click of, all right, this is what has been missing from Christianity for me. This kind of fills in all of the holes. The idea of why we were created was there. The ideas of, what does God and Jesus, what do they actually want for you? What do they want from you? Um, all of these ideas started to become a lot clearer to me. And I think that was finally what really did it for me. It made sense now. Like, it was like, this is truly the plan of a loving heavenly Father. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And slowly, as I was, building my faith and growing and learning, not just from people, but for myself and from the Spirit, for kind of the first time taking this new learning approach that I love, about our church. I was finally getting somewhere, and I finally started feeling like, okay, I'm not on a scary roller coaster. I'm on the path of, salvation, and I have, a loving heavenly Father that's got my back, and I finally have like a full deck of cards. I'd always felt like I was kind of dealt a bad hand, and I was stuck with it, and I finally, for the first time, felt like this life in this world was, a land of opportunity and a time of opportunity, and that God wanted me to have it all. And I've really been running with it ever since. I mean, I think the word of wisdom gave me such a good sense of self mastery and building blocks that I really needed to finally start making progress in my life. Um, I mean, quitting smoking, quitting drinking, starting to actually care about myself, like not just for myself, but about myself, and starting to understand what my role is in my life and how special and important we all really are, in the grand scheme of things. And just starting to hit, checkpoint after checkpoint in my life after that, because I had finally this solid foundation of faith. And as my faith grew, so did my life. I mean, my life has gotten dramatically better since I started. Um, I have my first home. I'm married. Got a great job. I'm finally back in college. I'm the first generation college student in my family ever. It's just really wonderful to see how, when you start to really have something you can believe in and something that has such good and miraculous apparent truth to it, how much further you can propel yourself when you realize that, these basic truths, I guess.
Yeah, looking at you now and listening to how you describe your life before I ever met you,
Yeah.
uh, to me, it seems like you've had a total turnaround.
Oh, absolutely.
How long would you say, like, I guess your investigation process with the church as you were meeting with the missionaries, how long did that take?
Not as long as you would think. I would say a month before I was kind of sold, to be honest, because my missionaries were awesome. I married one of them. My missionaries were great and had me doing lessons twice a week because I was just so hungry to finally get all the stuff that I was looking for. Um, I don't remember exactly how fast I was baptized. Those were such crazy times for me, especially because, I mean, at the time I was living in an RV doing nothing with my life, and the whole time's kind of a blur. But I remember that April, I probably started investigating, what, like that October maybe or something. So pretty quick, pretty fast between being at my absolute lowest in October and having no idea what to believe in to getting baptized and confirmed as a member in April and already having taken such leaps and bounds with my life.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that the word of wisdom was a particular strength in this
Yeah.
process, because that one is often something that I think maybe even inside the church we kind of see it as this sort of side commandment, or it gets a lot of question marks and raised eyebrows from people outside of the church who don't
Oh, yeah.
understand it. But I think that's really interesting that that stands out to you as something that was strengthening to you in
It was the
your
number one thing
process.
for a while. Yeah. Yeah.
So, what were some of the other things that you felt like were the answers that you were looking for? I know you talked about the plan of salvation. Was there anything specifically in there that really made sense to you? And was there anything in there that was similar to anything you had heard as you were investigating other churches and faiths as well?
Yeah. Well, for me, one, the idea that families can be together forever, because I feel like I think that's something most people kind of believe, at least to an extent, especially Christians, but there's not really any doctrine until you have, our restored gospel that supersets it in stone. So that was a big thing for me, the idea that, like, okay, I mean, I had lost my dad when I was really young. So this idea that, I could baptize my dad and, well, actually, I could probably focus on that a little bit more. My dad actually was someone that was an atheist, and I lost him when I was probably 12. And that was something I pondered a lot, was this idea of, like, well, from my understanding of kind of how it works, if it works, um, like, that's it. He's done. He didn't accept Jesus as his savior before he passed. He didn't repent his sins. His journey's over. And that was something that always weighed on me a lot. It weighed on my grandparents a lot too. Um, but then when we learned about the plan of salvation and kind of this general idea of work being done on both sides of the veil, that just really clicked with me, because like, there's so many people all over the world who maybe never even get to hear of Christ. But more importantly, I mean, even people who hear of Christ, maybe they have extenuating circumstances in their life that keep them from really ever getting to accept, Jesus or Christianity or spirituality in general, depending on where you live around the world. And it just didn't really make any sense to me that, like, where you were born could potentially determine your salvation in a way when you think about it. That doesn't make any sense to me, and that didn't make any sense to me of the idea of an all-loving God basically potentially putting, not always, like, people do overcome odds and find things and circumstances, but kind of tying a good deal of your salvation to a dice roll, essentially. uh, so the idea that not just my dad, but anybody, throughout any era, through any time, God is their God too. And those, the same opportunities that have been afforded to me will be afforded to them before or after they pass, even. That made a really big difference for me. In terms of teachings that I thought it kind of mirrored, actually, a lot of my kind of, I would say, upbringing, because my parents found it, I was probably 15 or 16, but I did see a lot of ideas of Buddhism in there when it comes to the ideas of really taking care of yourself and finding your own peace. Or a lot of people are familiar with the idea of nirvana. Some Buddhists believe in it in a religious way, in the sense of, reincarnating until you get it right, essentially, and then you get nirvana. Other Buddhists think of it as, a state of mind. But to me, that kind of mirrored a little bit the celestial kingdom, in the sense that, this might not make any sense if you don't know Buddhism at all. But rather than the idea of, you reincarnating and getting all these chances, the idea that your progression as a person isn't over after you pass and you could still reach your maximum potential. That really appealed to me as well, because I feel like, if we have spirits and we're children of God, that's kind of like the next logical step for me, I would think, is the idea that our self improvement will always continue. And I like that a lot. I think that really jived with me.
So it sounds like there were a lot of things that just logically made sense to you, um, and that's something that I really appreciate about our beliefs and our theology, is that it just, on a certain level, it just makes sense,
Right.
and that can do a lot for somebody's faith, right? If you can find answers that just make logical sense. Was there any, I guess, in addition to that, was there any time during this conversion process of yours where you felt like the Lord spoke to your mind and your heart? We talked about him speaking to your mind. Did you have any, I don't know, spiritual experiences in the process that stand out for you?
Oh yeah. So this was kind of a big thing, and this is one of the things that my family's super skeptical of when I talk about why I really know the church is true. But like I kind of talked about. I had a lot of hardships when I was younger. I generally would have considered myself to actually be a pretty depressive person, which I think people are actually very surprised by about now when they know me. But I was always a very doom and gloom kind of person. I wouldn't say I had any sense of like intrinsic happiness. I mean, I had happy days, but I didn't really have an intrinsic sense of happiness the way that I do now. I felt the spirit and like or the light of Christ, in little bits and pieces before I had prayed, and felt the burning of the heart as people talk about and that kind of thing, but never as totally as I remember the exact. Well, I should probably back it up to the night before. I was, sold on the church, I guess you could say. But obviously, before you make any life changing decision, you're a little like, oh, Jesus, this is really what I want to do. And I had prayed about it, and I was like, oh, I really like these things that I'm hearing. This makes logical sense to me, but I need to know from you, God. Like, I need to know that this isn't just like a really amazing sales pitch. This is actually what you want. Because people can make the greatest of philosophies, but ultimately, spirituality has to transcend philosophy at some point. And I prayed for some kind of sign, and I'd gone to get, you know, baptized and confirmed. And I remember after being baptized feeling really great. Now I was still like, yeah, I still don't really feel like I've gotten a huge sign yet. But when I got confirmed, right after that, I immediately felt the presence of the Spirit, and not just the burning of the heart, but such a like totality of peace and happiness, and even wisdom, like just like something else I'd never really felt before, and it stuck with me the entire time. I know many people say they have struggles feeling the Spirit, or maybe have never really felt that. I think a great spiritual blessing that I have is I always feel the Spirit since that exact moment. And I never had before, but I always feel at least a little bit of it all the time. They talk about the Holy Ghost being your companion, and it's like actually true. And it's so crazy to experience. I actually do feel this intrinsic sense of happiness and peace and wisdom, or sometimes warnings when I do something stupid. But I've always felt my companion with me ever since then. It never stops, and it is really something that I thought was kind of like spiritual, maybe like kind of hokey before I experienced it, to be honest. And it has been really incredible. I know that not everyone, gets to feel that, but I think I'm very fortunate. That's a spiritual blessing that I think I do have, is that I'm very sensitive to the Spirit, and there's a clear night and day feeling like in my heart and in my mind that can be contributed to that exact moment of being confirmed. And I thought it was an actual miracle.
Wow. Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
So, in your conversion process, as you were getting to know the church and coming around to some of the teachings and feeling like things were starting to make sense and discovering that this was the direction you wanted to go, did you have any opposition that you remember facing? And what can you tell us about that?
Oh yeah, yeah, quite a lot. So in Kentucky, the church isn't really very big, and not only are there not really a lot of members, which is one thing that isn't necessarily the most massive deal when you're joining, but there's a lot of misconceptions about the church. I'm sure that anybody that's ever even been in the church has gotten a couple very odd questions before about what we believe. In my family, was absolutely not on board. I remember it's kind of funny, maybe a little rude on my part, but I remember, I was going to talk to my parents eventually, or my mom and her husband, about being baptized, and my mom got so mad that I just kind of dropped it. Um, well, I did it anyways. About a week later, and about a month later, I was in a elders quorum, and someone had brought up, BYU's pathway program, and I was like, oh, like I don't know. No one in my family's ever gone to college. I tried college one time; it didn't work for me, but I'll give it a shot. And I went over to my mom's probably later that day, and I was like, I'm thinking of maybe doing this online college. And she had said, well, if you do that, you're going to have to join the church first, which, by the way, actually turns out you don't. That's kind of cool to do BYU Pathways. But at the time, I didn't know that. And I was like, well, here's the thing. I already did. And she absolutely lost it. And I had a lot of barriers when it came to that. My family was super not supportive because they didn't understand what we believed in. All of my friends were really, really upset about it. I had actually mentioned, earlier that, and I had a drinking problem. And before I joined, it was apparent to my family and my friends, and they kind of asked me, to either stop or slow down or think about that. Well, then now all of a sudden, when I managed to completely quit drinking, but it's from the help of the church, they were mad about it. I had a lot of experiences like that of people who were very, very bitter towards the church as an organization, people who had massive misunderstandings of our beliefs, and people who, for some reason, thought that I was going to be turned into a square or something. I had so many people that thought they were losing me because I was joining the church. And it was pretty upsetting. It was really hard to deal with at the time. I had a lot of friends who aren't my friend anymore because, they said that you're joining a cult or something, and but at the same time, I have, all my best friends are now like, I haven't managed to convert anybody, but allies of the church, people who really love what I'm doing and are more open minded to our beliefs. And, I've managed to spread some light into their lives as well. I have a great friend. He's been my best friend since I was 10 years old, and he had a rough go as well. He was kind of in and out of jail. But he had picked up Islam at one point, and my faith kind of being revived encouraged him to actually kind of go back to the well and give Islam another shot. And he's very happy doing that now. So it's been really, yes, the opposition is tough and it is difficult, but the more that I think we make these efforts to really explain our beliefs and don't shy away from kind of these difficult conversations, the more you have the chance to make an impact in other people's lives, regardless of their religious beliefs. And it helps legitimize ourselves as well. So it's been kind of a double edged thing. It's been really cool to get to be an advocate, especially in Kentucky, in an area where there's not very many members. It was pretty cool I really felt like I was breaking a lot of ground, not just being the first member in my family, but being one of the only converts I'd ever met in Kentucky. So it is worth it, as all good things are, even if you do face a lot of opposition. I think that we have so much inherent goodness, in our beliefs, and people see the change in myself as well. And it's just undeniable at that point. I mean, I've had people tell me I look healthier. I've had people tell me that my teeth are whiter, which doesn't make any sense. But I think I've made such a dramatic change in my life that even despite the opposition, I think I've proven myself just as much as I need to.
I could use some of those teeth whitening blessings.
Yeah, yeah.
So, as you joined the church, what were some of the biggest adjustments for you? Maybe just culture wise.
Oh, cultural wise? Well, I'm a pretty, like I said, people might be surprised because I feel so sunshiny now, but I've always been a pretty introverted person. And I walked into the church, and I think I had more people like put their hand on my shoulder or something like that than I ever have in my entire life. I feel like it's a cultural thing to be very like not just socially embracing, but I feel like, people of the church are literally kind of embracing people. So that was kind of a little bit different. That kind of culture of I walked in and I was immediately family in this place. I think the first day I went to church, I got like three different phone numbers. I'd met you probably a week later. It was a really different sense of openness that I had never gotten before. I had been to all these different churches, and the non-denominational church I had, originally got baptized there actually, and I've been a member. Well, I don't know if they really consider membership, but I have been there for probably about 2 years, and I don't think I met basically anybody. I met some of the kids at a youth group, never really made any friends. It was not like it is here, where, I mean, I'm sure even what's kind of unique about us is you can walk into any LDS church all over the entire country if you're traveling or if you move, and people will love you there. And it's just so different. That's not a thing in not just other churches. I mean, I'm sure there are very loving churches out there, but I can't think of another organization that has that kind of culture of universal love where you just meet people and they care about you. And it was so different. It's very refreshing now. It was very scary at the time, being a more walled off person. But that was really incredible. In terms of other things, being Southern, um, a challenge for me was not giving up my sweet tea. Every home in Kentucky has a jug or a pitcher of sweet tea, and when it's empty, you're expected to make the next pitcher, basically, or at least in rural communities. So that was a little bit different. Smoking is also pretty common in Kentucky. Tobacco was like I don't know if it still is, but our biggest crop. Everyone I knew grew up hauling tobacco, that kind of thing. So it was a little bit different to be separated from that kind of thing. People were very surprised when I stopped smoking, just because, I mean, I don't think growing up I had a single adult in my life that didn't smoke. So there were some differences when it came to that. My great grandparents, or well, rather their parents, were Irish. And so we had a lot of kind of like drinking culture and stuff like that. A lot of remedies were whiskey related, or, we had a lot of just generally big drinking culture in my family. Anytime something big happens, what do? You get some champagne. Anytime you visit somebody, they get down a bottle of whiskey or something like that. So there's definitely adjustments, and it's kind of difficult to stand your ground because you are kind of culturally becoming different a little bit. But for the most part, I think it's been great, and I think it's kind of taught me to have a little bit of a spine. So even though there were some uncomfortable moments for me coming from all these different cultures that kind of do things that I don't think are necessarily morally wrong, but things that I know I can't participate in anymore, it was a little bit of a challenge. But for the most part, it's been great.
Okay, awesome. Well, should we wrap it up with the big question? You've answered this in bits and pieces throughout, but the question I want to end with is, how is the restored gospel of Jesus Christ a marvelous work and a wonder to you?
Oh man, in more ways than it can really be explained, but I'll give it a shot. I feel like the best way I could put it is like I said before, where I used to feel like I was on a scary roller coaster I couldn't get off, and now I feel like the world is really a land of opportunity. I have heavenly parents that love me. I have a community that's amazing, that's been built on this cornerstone of faith. It's intrinsic happiness and faith to me that makes your life worth living regardless of what circumstances that you are in. It's continuous like patience and wisdom that is dispensed to me through my life. It's continuous light that I can spread, not just to myself but to others. It really just is everything. I don't know how to put it any other way, but it is really something fantastic. And if you can get involved with it, you absolutely should, because your life and the lives of people around you, and the way that you feel and the way that you think can absolutely turn on its head anytime that you're willing to really accept Christ into your life. Everything can really be more different than you could possibly imagine.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks so much for sharing your story with us. It's been a real pleasure for me.
yeah.
And thanks for being on Marvelous Wonder today. Thanks for listening to Marvelous Wonder. We'll see you next time.